Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to address you from the representatives of the WEA across the world. Timo, I thought Timo gave me an hour and a half. The top button. Can you help me, Timo? I'm going to start.
Keep talking.
I'm going to keep talking. No, actually, it's 15 minutes, so enjoy your 15-minute nap. When I was 37, I met a colleague of a gentleman named Peter Drucker. By raise of hands, people know Peter Drucker. This gentleman's name was Tom Patterson, and he was a colleague for 36 years. As they were moving from civil society consulting into commercial society consulting, and then eventually these gentlemen ended their careers in the nonprofit sector. And I'll describe some of those frameworks in a moment. But as they were moving from nation building, nation development, they moved into commercialization because they were commercializing military technologies. All of us are living in the benefits now of the commercialized technologies that they were engaged in, and commercializing technologies, military technologies. And I was challenged by Tom Patterson, who Peter called Applied Drucker. So Peter said something like, it's investment or waste. What do you do with that, folks? Well, so now we have to go and understand clearly what our mission is, gain perspective of our environment. Peter would talk about who our customer is, what our customer values, how we measure our customer performance, what's our plan, strategy, finance, operations. We took all of these concepts and we created a lab. And so in my 40s, we used these principles in an 82-year-old denomination, the Foursquare Church. And I'm going to give you some numbers that what we call strategic governance process. So I learned the information, the disciplines in what we would classically call business, and applied it in a nonprofit religious institution. And here are the productivity outcomes. Same group. It's the same group. So as we're having the conversation prior as well as later on, how do we merge these conversations? I want to present to you or create a concept for you to think about that all civil engagement, nonprofit engagement, and for-profit engagement are enterprise engagement. We simply are looking at different, we use different language and different outcomes. And let me see if this is working yet. Not working, okay. So I'm going to talk to you through the lens of strategic governance. And remember, this is a high flyover. So the proof of concept was an 82-year-old legacy organization. It was extremely passive-aggressive. And in 8 years, we went from 78 nations to 138 nations. We increased from 11,000 churches to 60,000. The annual salvation yield, which was their metric, went from 114,000 a year to 3 million. We looked at their balance sheet. Hidden in the balance sheet when we started was $280 million. Hidden in the balance sheet was $1 billion that we leveraged out. Now, the skill sets that are in this room, no doubt, if you go into Christian organizations, the way they look at their balance sheet and the way they look at or identify performance, if they think they're just a nonprofit rather than a fully engaged enterprise, their views and then what they're leveraging is different. And this is back to investment or waste. We carved out an asset and stood up a foundation for $250 million. And that foundation was hidden as a $1 million asset on the balance sheet. And that's the enterprise capitalization that we engaged. and our annual salvation numbers went from $114 a salvation to $4 a salvation using enterprise skills. So what is in us in this room in terms of business or enterprise skills applied into the nonprofit sector can create these kinds of metrics. Now that's the lab. And so we proved strategic governance. And I want to move now into perspective, and probably the last 5 minutes I'll be going into capital, because the way that I view, since we don't have our the deck, I'm going to be free-ranging a little bit here. The deck is up. Here we go. Okay. So in a conference about 2 weeks ago in Brazil, heard some numbers. I want to encourage you. In order to look through the lens of strategic governance, let's understand what Peter asks when he would start his consulting. He would say, what business are you in? And how is business? So for our conversation, the proposition is, as Christians or kingdom individuals, our business is human flourishing. Our business is discipling nations. Let's carve through all the sectarian and doctrinal frameworks. Jesus is very interested that we live in John 17 and that we engage in unity and we do what he and the Father want to do. We engage with him and with each other in love. And the love that he showed us was human flourishing. Now, this is not the human flourishing, which is an emerging social science. This is human flourishing where each individual we engage is loved physically, mentally, emotionally. And so what we're really trying to understand as evangelicals is how to take this message and now use the capacities we now have in our society and leverage that into discipling nations. But let me get perspective. Lauren Cunningham and Mark Anderson, who are leaders in the YWAM movement, this is not on my deck, but in AD 100, 1 out of 360 people were Christians. So now we go to 1980, or 1900. One out of 27 people, when the world was 1 billion people, 1 out of 27 were Christians. So where are we today? 1 out of 3. That's a pattern and trend. That's an opportunity for us. What is it that God is doing intrinsically in us, directly and indirectly, whether we see it or not? What is God doing that is leading to this incredible inflow of heaven on earth? And so we'll be having some of these discussions. But I want you to also understand that in the 1 of 3, 2.2 billion of 7.2 billion, these are the numbers I was working with. Of that, 1 billion are cultural Christians. They say they're Christians, they're raised in Christian society. They don't really operate and necessarily activate in their faith proposition. This is somewhat of the proposition that we're having in the European discussion, even North America, post-Christian. Other parts of the world are very dramatic. We were just in Brazil, that place is hopping. They don't even understand this post-Christian concept. There's parts of the world that are just dramatically accelerating. 1 billion are poised for change, and this is the opportunity for WEA and the business people in this room to fully understand what the patterns and trends are. We estimate that 200 million Christians are ready to go. They're engaged, but they need more effective tools. They need more effective strategy, more effective operations, and more effective financial capacity. With that opening, we are in several conversations. This is strategy, the grand strategy. The 3 conversations we're in with several of us that can either be a small group of several dozen to groups of 1,500 organizations that we're collaborating with, is where is the grand strategy? Billy Graham in 2000 asked, how are we doing with the Great Commission? I'm asking today, based upon our lab and with other colleagues, where is the grand strategy? Where is the plan per nation? What's the strategy? What's the operations? And what's the finance? Can we do this? Can we mobilize in a more effective way? This is looking at our current, what I would call civilization framework. If we are going, and at this moment, we are in active engagement with groups, collective group, what we call culturally contextualized collaborations, where groups get together with common finish lines and then they adopt elements of the finish line and they go out into their existing networks to accomplish the same finish lines. But we don't necessarily see this. There's a group called Table 71. Had anybody heard about Table 71, right? A few of us. This group got together and they decided to collaborate. They started as 12 into the year 2000. There are 1,500 agencies now and 60,000 leaders around the world around 7 common finish lines. I'm going to read these common finish lines. These aren't the 7 sustainable. These are different. Reaching all people groups, Bible access, church presence, proclaiming the gospel, compassion and justice. I would suggest the 17 sustainable are compassion and justice. But these are their finish lines. So this is what they did in 19 years. They went from 3,700 unreached people groups to 280. This is biblical proportion stuff. This is, you read in Scripture, all people shall hear. We're now watching this happen before our very eyes. Every person shall hear. We went from 150 years estimating our Bible translations in every language now to, by the year 2030, we'll probably have every language engaged. So in terms of patterns and trends, we have gone from 130, 1 out of 360 people, down to 1 out of 3. Now, the new technologies that are being released, the pattern and trend of the last 150 years in technology is so dramatic that in the next 10 years, we might be watching tranches of hundreds of millions of people come to Christ. This is not fantasy, folks. This, if you look at the patterns and trends, we can engage this. We can be productive people in this process if we collaborate together and fully comprehend the tools that we have. So we're looking at civilization and we're saying to ourselves, what is it that God's doing? Is He's impressing heaven on earth as we say the Lord's Prayer. The middle of this, so the top of the mountain or the top of the pyramid is basically what is the Lord doing? This is the perspective, the patterns and trends. What has the Lord been doing? We call the agile world in the middle. The agile world is impact technologies. This is the different use of impact. We can use agile or leapfrog. Okay, this is not the same use of impact we were saying before, using the speaker before. Impact means that any 1 or 2 technologies introduced into a nation can dramatically change the whole society. We're actually living with it right now. Okay, it just happened over quick time, but some of this is going to be very, very quick. There's Chris is in the room. There's several in the room that recognize or know of a company that is on the verge of commercializing wireless transmission of power. Wireless transmission of power, going into commercialization, over 200 patents. You guys understand what that means? We already have 2 billion people in the world that still don't have electricity. That means that within several years, we're going to be a commercialization. Within a decade, we could be delivering electricity to every person on the planet, moving from animal power and human power into manufacturing power, which is absolutely dramatic in terms of the whole wave of the human enterprise. So we're talking about these mega trends, and this is where we're going to go to on finance in a moment. Where's my clock? Do I have another 30 minutes? No, I just don't see a clock. Okay.
30 seconds.
Huh?
30 seconds.
Okay, thank you very much. So the civilization conversation is we have the opportunity among ourselves to collaborate with each other and come up with a plan per nation, a plan per region. We have the abilities to do that now. We do that in business all the time. Okay, we take markets. Using this chart here, the bottom is what we call legacy. This is the existing framework that we operate in, the existing societies we operate in, the existing knowns. So what's going to happen with these agile world and these impact technologies? They're in R&D, pre-commercialization, or early commercialization right now, and they will dramatically impact our cultures. If Christians can be in the forefront of this planning and these opportunities, we have an opportunity to actually impact our whole societies if we're the leaders of our societies. What we don't have with this little area down here, these little mountains frameworks, is these are spheres of the culture, frameworks of culture, and we'll talk about that. This is how our societies are structured. What we don't have in Christianity that many enterprises have is we don't have a common communication platform. We don't have a common intelligence platform. We don't have a common mobilization platform. All the tools that we learn in enterprise, for-profit enterprise, we don't have in Christianity. And so one of the tools that we're making a proposition here that you're playing with in early adoption, which will be released, is this cross-silo technology platform that we're testing here, just one part of that technology. But as we look at civil society, there's civil society, nonprofit society, for-profit society, for us to clearly understand the delineation of what these societies offer and how we enterprise in these societies. Our discussion today is finance. How we use the profits generating out of finance that basically actually finance all of society. The profits that we generate finance our nations. How we integrate and have those conversations with the civil sector and the nonprofit sector, those are between nations, those are political contests, and those are very different. In the 243 nations and territories, we have such an array of differences. When we talk about human flourishing, Maslow's theory of hierarchy, 2.5 to 3 billion people do not have physiological or practical physical safety. And that's what we're talking about in the 17 Sustainable Goals. We're talking about an equality in the world for access to the technologies that many of us already have. And as I was suggesting earlier, that these technologies are coming dramatically. Talking about these technologies, what's happened, here's a visual. In 1990 on the left was Shanghai, 2010 is Shanghai. That's called leapfrog technology. They didn't have to go through the 150-year investment trend that the US and Europe went through. They were able to adapt all of our new technologies and stand up a modern economy for their people in a very short period of time. This is dramatic. This is the same thing we're going to be looking at in nations. This is where we're going. Right now, we're talking about Christianity, ineffective recruiting process, lack of best standards. We're siloed, underfunded, no comprehensive planning, unified or ununified, undefined. We look at ourselves within Christianity, all of our sectarians, all of our nations, all of our associations, we're individual silos. Nothing is connecting us together. But this is what the opportunities are, that we actually go cross-silo. One of the productivity performance drivers that we had in the denomination I was describing is that we crossed all our silos with common communication strategies, common budgeting practices. Everything became common. Our language became common, and anywhere in the world, point-to-point, immediate communication, actionable communication, we were able to accelerate performance. We opened up the balance sheet. We created massive communications. We started speaking the same language, a uniform strategy, and you heard the output that we had. Here's a Malawi plan. One technology standing up. This is Malawi is a desperate country. 55% of the nation is in abject poverty, 19 million people. We took one technology. We were invited into Malawi and began conversations. It's very important to be invited in by the individuals of a nation culturally, and for us to begin the dialogue of how we can help them create sustainable opportunities in their nations. This is the Malawi plan, the national plan just on charcoal. where right now deforestation is polluting all their water systems. We're deforesting their forests. It's an illicit business. They protect their forests. Okay, so we introduced one technology, and I'm going to go through this. We hit every pillar, every element of that nation's strategy of eliminating charcoal as their heating methodology for cooking and self-care. And for a $72 million investment, or about $3.50 a person, we stood up an industry that will create agricultural water usage will increase, deforestation will stop. We introduce wireless electricity, 5G transmission, water purification, create a waste management system, create hard currency for $72 million. And that investment produces $20 million a year. Okay, so what we estimate with the individuals in Malawi that we move, we actually create a miracle there with a embedded venture. We actually create a miracle there. $100 million of earnings in 5 years moves the dial almost to 5% on poverty reduction. That's only a $72 million investment. We're going very, very quick here. The $72 million investment, just the earnings from the investment go into these various categories. There's a strategy where they actually invest in every one of these areas of society and change society. We're looking at a model of 5 to 6% influence actually leverages a nation. So we're looking at 5 to 6% gatekeeper access and controls. And I'm going to go back for you for a moment. Let me talk to you real quick. What we're finding right now in the world in terms of capital formation, these are the mega trends. There's emerging operating endowments, we call them. The businesses in and of themselves intrinsically are missional. So if we go in with a classic infrastructure technology and we engage with the government in and of itself, that solves a society government issue. Intrinsically, as Christians, we can do that with our capitalization and our technology. The money then is distributed throughout the society, nonprofit, for-profit. You saw the model from Malawi. Earnings go to finance missional initiatives. We have an example of this. It's not a Christian agency. We have the Bosch Corporation here in Germany. 95% of Bosch, are people familiar with Bosch? Did you know that 94% of it is owned by the charitable foundation of the family? And they invest. So this is the concept where there's an intrinsic national strategy and the earnings are distributed into society. Now, they're not a Christian agency, and they're deciding how to distribute that differently. We have emerging philanthropic investing. What I mean by this is that we have high net worth individuals now that are beginning to look at their money investment, short, intermediate, and long term, their corpus, as it were, and they're starting to look very specifically at these technologies. How do we invest in these technologies? How do we invest in global strategies, collaborations? And we actually start working an investment portfolio and a project portfolio, and we merge them. That's the beginning of now operating as a church to begin discipling nations. High impact portfolio investment, which we alluded to earlier. There's the beginning of strategies that are being set aside funds and fund to funds and collaborations now where we actually are looking at nations. And finally, the most emerging one that is dramatic is the use of AI and blockchain, where we're going to move away from centralized government control of finance. All of these technologies, all of these methodologies, just to close, all of this is on the horizon or in our lives right now. It's up to us. Our opportunity as global Christians is to harness this, to see the big patterns and trends, to mobilize the 200 million that want to be mobilized, and to begin looking at national strategies together. Thank you very much.